Have you ever heard of a ruler who presided over an empire at its absolute largest, yet whose reign also sowed the seeds of its future troubles? That's the story of Murad III, the 12th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. His time on the throne from 1574 to 1595 is a fascinating paradox of immense power, crippling wars, and deep-seated change. Let's dive into the complex world of this pivotal but often overlooked sultan. Murad III came to power succeeding his father, Selim II, inheriting an empire that was, by all measures, a global superpower. The Ottoman banners flew from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Indian Ocean. But beneath this glittering surface, cracks were beginning to show. The empire was facing challenges that weren't just about armies and borders, but about its very economic and political foundations. The most defining feature of Murad's reign was constant, draining warfare. He wasn't a sultan who led his armies from the front like his famous ancestors. Instead, he directed his campaigns from the splendor of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, relying on his generals to execute his will. And their hands were full. To the east, the Ottomans were locked in a major conflict with their perennial rivals, the Safavid Empire in Persia. This war, which stretched from 1578 to 1590, was a massive undertaking. The goal was to seize control of the Caucasus region, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. After years of brutal fighting and immense cost, the Ottomans emerged victorious. They captured vast territories, pushing the empire's eastern border further than it had ever been before or ever would be again. For a moment, it seemed like an unparalleled triumph. The Ottomans controlled the lucrative trade routes and had asserted their dominance over their main rival. But this victory came at a staggering price, draining the treasury and pulling elite troops away from other critical fronts. While the armies were busy in the east, trouble was brewing in the west. Murad's reign saw the beginning of what historians call the Long Turkish War against the powerful Habsburg monarchy. This conflict, centered in the Balkans and Hungary, would drag on for years, even after Murad's death. Unlike the decisive, though costly war in the east, this was a grinding, back-and-forth struggle. It was a war of sieges, raids, and attrition that consumed men and money without clear victories. These two massive wars, fought simultaneously on opposite ends of the empire, placed an unprecedented strain on the Ottoman state. The empire was fighting to maintain its superpower status, but the cost was becoming unsustainable. This brings us to one of the most significant shifts happening within the empire, the changing nature of power. Murad III, his disinterest in personally leading armies or managing the day-to-day affairs of state created a power vacuum. And as the old saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. This one was filled by the powerful figures within the imperial palace. This era marked the true beginning of what is often called the Sultanate of Women. This wasn't a formal title, but a term used by historians to describe a period where the mothers, wives, and other female relatives of the Sultan wielded immense political influence. Murad's mother, Nurbanu Sultan, and later his favorite consort, Safiye Sultan, were formidable political players. They managed networks of patronage, influenced appointments to high office, and had a direct line to the Sultan's ear. They weren't just palace residents. They were power brokers, shaping policy from behind the scenes. This shift wasn't necessarily good or bad, but it fundamentally changed how the empire was governed. Decisions were increasingly made not just by the Sultan and his Grand Vizier, but by a complex web of court factions, with the women of the harem at its center. While the court intrigued, the empire's economy was spiraling into a crisis. One of the biggest culprits was something happening thousands of miles away: the discovery of massive amounts of silver in the New World by the Spanish. This silver flooded into Europe and eventually into the Ottoman economy. The result was massive inflation. The Ottoman silver coin, the akçe, lost its value dramatically. For an ordinary person, this meant the money in their pocket was worth less and less each day. Prices for food and basic goods shot up. The government, desperate for cash to fund its endless wars, resorted to debasing the currency, meaning they would melt down old coins and mint new ones with less precious metal in them. This only made the inflation worse and destroyed public confidence in the currency. This economic turmoil had severe consequences. The Janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman army, were paid in these devalued coins. Their salaries were effectively cut, and they were not happy about it. Throughout Murad's reign, there were numerous Janissary revolts. These weren't just riots. They were serious challenges to the state's authority. The very soldiers meant to protect the empire were now a source of internal instability, their legendary discipline beginning to fray under economic pressure. Yet amid all this turmoil and crisis, Murad III was also a man of deep faith and a great patron of the arts. He may have been disconnected from the battlefield, but he was intimately connected to the cultural and religious life of his empire. He commissioned magnificent mosques, supported religious scholars, and poured resources into the imperial workshops. The art of manuscript illumination and calligraphy flourished under his patronage. Exquisite copies of the Quran and illustrated histories were produced, showcasing the incredible skill of Ottoman artists. This is the paradox of his reign. On one hand, you have military overstretch, economic crisis, and political infighting. On the other, you have a vibrant cultural scene and a ruler who saw himself as a pious guardian of Islamic tradition. He was continuing the grand imperial tradition of artistic patronage, even as the foundations of that empire were being shaken. In 1595, Murad III died in Istanbul. He was buried in a grand tomb in the courtyard of the Hagia Sophia, a final testament to his status. He was succeeded by his son, Mehmed III, who inherited an empire that was territorially vast but deeply troubled. Murad's reign is a crucial turning point. He ruled over the Ottoman Empire at its greatest geographical extent, but the challenges that emerged during his time, inflation, military strain, and the shifting political landscape, would dominate the empire's story for the next 2 centuries. In conclusion, Murad III's era was a complex and demanding one. He wasn't a warrior sultan like his ancestors, but an inward-looking ruler who presided over a period of immense change. Under his watch, the empire achieved its final great expansion in the east, but the endless wars, economic instability, and the rise of court politics signaled the end of an era.